Good. So let's start with this Q&A session. I want to showcase you shortly some time-wise information. As you all know, the first version was published roughly 1.5 years ago in October 2022. And we realized by using it or C-Sync Manager using it and having discussions with newcomers as well, that there needs to be some adjustments, some clear definitions, and it was time to go on to a second version. Last December, we had this public feedback round with a version where you all were able to hand in feedback. Thanks for everyone that contributed to this. And it took us a little bit longer time than we thought to incorporate all these feedbacks. And we wanted as well to directly include PDDs in the version 2.1. And we finally were able to publish and make it official 2 weeks ago on the 25th of March. In this new version, we not only had more definitions or clear definitions, we also used the opportunity to include new stuff. I think most prominent is the pyrolysis cook stove, so tillet microgasifier that are now an official technology. In the standards, we added in the last week or 2 weeks a new calculation method for the margin of security. I will come to that. With the tillet cook stove, we also introduced a pro rata approach for the methane emission, because in comparison to kontikis in a cook stove, cooking is the main reason to use it and not to produce biochar. We made some thoughts about the climate forcing of atmospheric methane. So how can you compensate the methane that your kontiki or kiln is producing? We tried to improve the layout and understanding and showcasing of our equations and calculations in the standard to make it more readable and understandable. And the last point was we introduced the project design documentation, which kind of replacing the project plan, which mostly all of you knew from your own process to become a C-Sync manager. Now I will go to specific changes in the standard that we think is important to mention. And of course, there are several of them that we will not discuss in this meeting, this presentation. If you have specific questions to that, feel free to ask it afterwards. One change that might affect some of you, especially Artisan C-Sync manager that want to have projects across the globe, is that we now request or defined a little bit more properly what we meant with firmly anchored in the version 1 of the standard. So for us, we wanted to define it more properly, and that everyone understands that for us, it's really that an Artisan C-Sync manager needs to be somehow registered as a company or organization in the country of activity. So it can be that you have kind of a daughter company, a sub company in this country that acts as the C-Sync manager in your name, or that you team up with a local NGO or partner that is doing also work for you as the C-Sync manager. If you already have your company in the country that you're working with and only do their biochar artisan projects, then it will not affect you at all. Then we have these cook stoves that I already mentioned. It's like one big opportunity that we thought make sense to include in the standard, so that we not only have like the big kontikis, but that we also have like a solution for cook stoves that are mostly currently used in reduction avoidance projects. But as research showed and analysis showed that the biochar they are producing is as well eligible and of good quality that it can be used in agriculture in soils. So there we wanted to give the opportunity to project developers to also be able to use that and to anchor it in our standard directly. Besides, or in comparison to Contiki or soil pits, we have the requirement that each individual TLUT or model needs to still be endorsed. So it's not as with Contiki where we just say like, if it looks like a Contiki or a soil pit, if it runs like it, if it smells like it, then it is a Contiki and you don't have to bring any proof to it. With this cook stove, it's different. So for each of these TLUT models, we need specific information about it. For example, the methane emissions, and it has to be shown that the biochar that is produced with it at least meets the WBC agro certification class. Also, as with cook stoves, the production is completely different as it is in small households. So multiple various small producer in this case. It also means that from a tracking perspective, there needed to be some changes and adaptations. But once the biochar is produced, it will be collected at a centralized factory. And from there onwards, it's more or less the same when it comes to tracking of mixing application as it with the rest of the artisanal biochar producers. And obviously, we hope that this will give like cook stoves a new boost in the world, and that people are now have also the opportunities to get removal credits for their projects. With the cook stoves, we also had like to think about the methane emissions and introduced a pro rata approach for it. Because the main purpose of a cook stove is the cooking and not the production of biochar. So we came up with this approach to make it fair to the cook stoves, that the main emissions are counted to the cooking and only based on the energy content of the biochar compared to the feedstock will then be applied to the biochar in this case. So in the standard on page 39, you find all that you need to know about how to calculate it and what you need to bring as a proof for it. We also wanted to use this update to make some simplicities and make things easier. And one of that is like the margin of security. As you might all remember, in the version 1, we had the definition that the margin of security is calculated based on 3% of the carbon content of the biochar. And that led as well to some misunderstanding how exactly you have to calculate it, because there would have been like two options. We wanted to make it easier so that everyone had like the same calculation and the same understanding. And we realized that it's much simpler to have like a flat margin of security based on kilograms of CO2 per ton of biochar dry matter produced. And so we made based on the information and numbers that we had, we realized, okay, often it is roughly 20 kilograms of CO2 per ton of biochar produced. And so we changed the calculation method, the equation, to this number, to this value. In this 20 kilograms, it is the same involved as with the old version of the 3%. So basic emission that comes with the artisanal production of biochar. So some amount of transportation up to 100 kilometers is included. Basic electricity or fossil usage that might come along with like milling, blending by hand, or with really like low-tech systems are included as well. And so we hope that with this change, it's also like for the MRV provider, much easier, and for you as well as a seasonk manager when you do the calculation, your business case, to get appropriate numbers. Then, as our registry evolves and adapts, we also had like some probably new definitions or adapted definitions of a seasonk unit. And the global seasonk registry is named officially in the standard. The seasonk unit is still like the same as it was before, with this bulk upload template through Excel. We still are doing the same. It has not changed in how to document or how to bring the data, how you can aggregate it. It's just that we now have like a name for it, the seasonk unit, so that we have like a word and understanding what it is. Still, we want to keep our registry useful. So we still aim that we don't want to have like bulk uploads or entries less than 1 ton of CO2 equivalent in the registry. So to just keep it lean, and that also you don't need to like retire hundreds of 1 kilogram entries if you want to sell afterwards the credits. For us, it's also that we want to have the same understanding as with industrial scale. So we want to unify it a little bit and say that, okay, everything below 1 ton of CO2 equivalent can be a diffuse seasonk, where usually the point or the time of when the biochar is mixed with compost, manure, or whatever matrix, that this acts as the final point in the tracking. And only if you have like higher packaging units with more CO2 equivalent that you need to track until the final end consumer. This is also a requirement from classic labels that you would like to achieve as a registry when it comes to double counting, and prohibit such cases. Because in the future, soil carbon matter increase projects and credits are more and more upcoming, and we want to be able that it's clear like where is the biochar, that we can avoid that someone gets double credits when he uses biochar and is part of a soil carbon project. For the global seasonk registry, it's just that we now officially have a name for it. And in the past, it was just like the registry. As you know, for carbon standards, the effect of climate forcing for methane is really important for us. And it's one of our unique selling points that we included in our standards whenever we could. We have some slight changes when it comes to the calculation of it. So in the previous version, we used a different GWP factor. It was a GWP 20. And now we go with the time and use the GWP 100 to determine how much you have to to compensate. When you do the math, more or less, you will end up with the same number that you have to compensate. Just a little bit different how to calculate it. What is still the same is that you have to compensate the methane emissions within the first 20 years of emitting. And we included a new way of doing it. So in the past, you always had the opportunity to claim for avoidance based on your feedstock. You had the opportunity or the possibility to go for avoidance for decomposition, not only for burning it. And you had the additional growth of biomass or tree plantations. Now we wanted also to make it official that you can use the SPC fraction of your biochar. As you know, not all the carbon of your biochar is stable for millions of years. So that's a persistent part, the PUC, and the semi-persistent part, the SPC, which will decay within like the first 1,000 years. But this SPC fraction can still be used to compensate for the methane emissions. So we directly give this part a value, as prior you would not be able to sell this amount with classic carbon credits. And in the standard on page 46, we wrote down how you can calculate and what's our basic understanding. So also, when you emit methane, methane has a decay. So at one point of time, as you see in the graph, you have in the year 0, you have the emission, and then based on the decay, it will be less and less. As the carbon in your biochar as well has a decay, also the SPT fraction has a decay. And the SPT fraction would be like the blue part. So within the first 20 years, your SPC fraction has a certain cooling effect, how we call it. And you can see that in theory, if the red part would be the same area as the blue one, then in these 20 years, all of it could be compensated by the SPC fraction. But as we calculate the methane over 100 years, and you need to compensate all of the red volume in your first 20 years, you realize that usually the SPC fraction that is counted for the first 20 years will not be sufficient to cover all of your methane emissions. So there will still be trees to be planted, but at least it gives you some support when it comes to reduce the trees that you are needed to compensate. What we currently developing is a simple online calculator that you can type in how much per ton of biochar is your methane emission, based on the biochar that you are producing, how much SPC fraction you have, and then it will give you out, okay, with the SPC fraction in the first 20 years, you are able to compensate this percentage of your methane, and this means the rest of it would still be needed to be compensated by trees. Then we also tried to work on the layout with some new formatting of diagrams, figures, or equations to make it more feasible to directly catch what is important. Then, obviously, when a new standard is coming into place, there needs to be a transition phase or a transition period. We decided, especially with the PDDs that we now want or now introduced, to give a very long transition phase. So the transition phase started on the 25th of March with the publication of the final version, and it will go on until the end of the year. So every CSync manager that was registered before 1st of April can still decide if he wants to go with the version 1 or the version 2.1 this year. And the PDD is not required, a validated PDD is not required to go for the on-site audit and inspection by our certifier CERES. Every company that started or registered after the 1st of April, they have to apply the new version 2.1. So for existing CSync managers that are now going for a new project, for example, they started in Mozambique and now they want to go to Malaysia with this new project, they have to go through version 2.1. So a PDD is required. And for everyone that now has maybe the second certification, second on-site inspection, the PDD is still not a must-have to do it. Nevertheless, obviously, we encourage all of you to start with the PDD, to use this opportunity to work on it and get it validated. In this transition phase, obviously, Luke and I will be happy to assist you and have a read through your PDD to check basically if you understood our templates that we created, if there are like some misunderstandings, and if you sorted out it correctly. Then again, this information, this Q&A session was or is recorded. We will provide it together with the slides on our website. It might take some days to cut it and arrange everything. If you have questions afterwards, you are always encouraged to write us an email to me or Luki directly. Then enjoy the rest of your day, evening, or night, depending on where you are.